Picture a human heart, not the Valentine's Day cartoon, the real thing. 4 chambers, valves opening and closing 60 times a minute, blood flowing out through arteries, returning through veins, a continuous, rhythmic, seamless circulation that keeps an entire body alive. Now picture someone reaching into that chest, grabbing the aorta and clamping it shut. The heart does not slow down. The heart does not adjust. The heart stops. And every organ that depended on that circulation, the brain, the lungs, the kidneys, the muscles, begins dying. Not in weeks, not in days, in minutes. This morning, the aorta of the North American economy was clamped shut. If you drive past the General Motors assembly plants in Ontario right now, as you are watching this, you will see something that should make your blood run cold. Empty parking lots stretching across acres of asphalt, silent smokestacks that have not been cold in half a century, heavy steel chains wrapped around the main gates, brass padlocks, the kind of locks you put on something you do not expect to open again soon. Tens of thousands of workers were sent home this morning. No timeline for return, no promise of recall, no severance plan announced. Just go home. The gates are locked. The lines are dark. It is over. General Motors, the corporation that built the middle class, the corporation whose name is synonymous with North American industrial power, the corporation that has operated on both sides of the US-Canada border for longer than most people have been alive, has officially announced the immediate and indefinite suspension of all major Canadian manufacturing operations. And if you think this is a Canadian problem, if you think this only affects workers in Ontario and Quebec, if you think the locked gates in Oshawa have nothing to do with the dealership in your town, or the factory in your state, or the price you pay for the truck sitting in your driveway, you are about to learn how catastrophically wrong that assumption is. Because what happened this morning is not a plant closure. It is the first domino in a chain reaction that will shut down American assembly lines within days, spike vehicle prices by thousands of dollars within weeks, and cripple the United States military's industrial base within months. Donald Trump forced General Motors out of Canada. He used tariffs like a crowbar, prying the corporation out of its Canadian operations and dragging it south. He wanted the photo op. He wanted to stand at the podium and declare that he brought the jobs home. He wanted the victory lap. He got the photo op. What he did not get, what his advisors did not model, what his trade team did not anticipate, what the entire White House failed to understand until it was too late, was what Mark Carney would do next. Because within hours of the GM shutdown, the Prime Minister of Canada stood at a podium in Ottawa and detonated an economic weapon so precisely engineered, so surgically targeted, so mathematically devastating that it did not just retaliate against Trump's tariffs. It made the tariffs self-destructive. Canada announced an immediate, indefinite export embargo on all processed aluminum, all specialized steel alloys, and all critical battery minerals destined for American automotive manufacturing. Not tariffs, not restrictions, not quotas, a total embargo. The materials that American factories need to stamp body panels, cast engine blocks, build battery cells, and assemble every car, truck, and SUV sold in the United States, those materials come from Canada. And as of this morning, they are not coming anymore. Trump pulled the assembly jobs out of Canada. Carney cut off the raw materials those jobs depend on. Trump wanted to build cars in America. Carney just made it impossible to build cars in America. The president ripped the heart out of Canada's auto industry and held it up as a trophy. The prime minister clamped the aorta and watched the body start dying. And the body that is dying is not Canada's, it is America's. In this breakdown, I am going to walk you through exactly how this crisis unfolded, hour by hour, decision by decision, and show you how a trade strategy designed to strengthen American manufacturing has instead destroyed it. I am going to give you the receipts that prove the American auto industry cannot survive without Canadian raw materials and that no alternative supply chain exists. I am going to reveal the Pentagon's assessment of what the critical minerals embargo means for military readiness and why generals are describing this as the worst self-inflicted wound in the history of American defense policy. I'm going to give you the psychological profile comparison that explains why Trump walked into a trap he should have seen from 1,000 miles away and why Carney had the trap set before the tariffs were even announced. I am going to show you exactly how this crisis will hit your wallet. The price of your next car, the value of your current car, the cost of everything that moves on four wheels. And I am going to give you three scenarios for what happens next, because the next 72 hours will determine whether North American industrial integration survives or dies permanently. Subscribe to join the community. Leave a comment so we can keep the conversation going. And share this video because the mainstream media is framing this as a trade dispute. It is not a trade dispute. It is the death of the most successful industrial partnership in the history of the modern world. And every American who drives a car, buys groceries transported by truck, or cares about national security needs to understand what just happened. Let me walk you through the timeline because the speed of this collapse tells you everything about how fragile the system was and how completely the White House misunderstood what they were destroying. At dawn this morning, General Motors executives released a statement that sent an immediate chill through global financial markets. The statement cited new prohibitive export tariffs imposed by the Trump administration on vehicles and components assembled outside the United States. Under those tariffs, every car and every component produced at GM's Canadian facilities would face a tax so severe that Canadian production became financially impossible overnight. The math is brutal and simple. If a vehicle assembled in Ontario faces a 25% tariff when it crosses into the United States, and that vehicle was previously priced competitively with American-assembled alternatives, the tariff makes the Canadian-built vehicle $8,000 to $12,000 more expensive than its domestic equivalent. No consumer will pay that premium. No dealer will stock that inventory. No corporation will sustain that production. GM did the math. The math said, leave. Thousands of workers whose families have worked in those plants for 2 and 3 generations, workers who represent the living legacy of North American industrial cooperation, received the news this morning. Not in a meeting, not with advance warning, not with a transition plan. They were told to go home. The lines were stopping, the gates were closing, their jobs, the jobs that paid for their mortgages, their children's education, their retirements were gone. For the Trump administration, this was initially framed as a victory, a massive, decisive demonstration of America First in action. The champagne corks were popping in the West Wing. Senior officials were preparing talking points about bringing manufacturing home. The communications team was drafting the president's statement for the afternoon press briefing. The assumption in Washington, the assumption that has underpinned every miscalculation in this administration's trade policy, was that Canada would take the hit. The White House operates on the foundational belief that Canada is too polite, too dependent, too small to fight back. They assumed Carney would get on a plane to Washington, sit across from Trump in the Oval Office, and beg for relief. They assumed Canada would offer concessions, lower its standards, accept subordinate status, and wait for the storm to pass. That assumption lasted approximately 4 hours. At midday, Mark Carney took the podium in Ottawa, and the press conference that followed will be studied in business schools and war colleges for the next 50 years as the definitive case study in asymmetric economic warfare. Carney did not look angry. He did not raise his voice. He did not issue threats or ultimatums or dramatic declarations of retaliation. He spoke with the flat, measured cadence of a central banker reading quarterly projections, numbers, facts, mechanisms, consequences, the delivery of a man who has spent his career navigating global financial crises and understands that panic is the enemy of precision. He announced the immediate activation of the Strategic Automotive Resilience Act. The name was deliberately boring, deliberately bureaucratic. It sounded like a domestic support package for displaced workers, the kind of policy announcement that would normally get 3 paragraphs in the business section and disappear by the afternoon news cycle. But buried within the directive, buried in the technical language, buried in the subsections and implementation schedules, buried where only someone who reads the full text would find it, was the weapon. Canada announced an immediate, indefinite export embargo on 3 categories of materials destined for American automotive manufacturing. Category 1, processed aluminum. Every sheet, every coil, every billet of finished aluminum that Canadian smelters produce for the American auto industry, the aluminum that becomes body panels, engine housings, wheel rims, structural components. Embargo, effective immediately. Category 2, specialized steel alloys, the high-strength, precisely formulated steel that American plants use for chassis frames, suspension components, crash structures, and safety-critical assemblies. Not commodity steel that can be sourced from anyone. Specialized alloys produced by Canadian mills to exact specifications required by American automakers. Alloys that took years of joint development between Canadian producers and American engineers. Embargo, effective immediately. Category 3, critical battery minerals, lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite. The elements that go into every electric vehicle battery cell produced in North America. The elements that the entire American EV transition depends on. The elements that the United States does not mine in sufficient quantities domestically and cannot source from any other secure proximate supplier. Embargo, effective immediately. Carney did not put a retaliatory tariff on American cars entering Canada. That would have been proportional. That would have been predictable. That would have been the kind of tit-for-tat escalation that trade negotiators understand and can manage. Carney did something fundamentally different. He did not retaliate against American products. He cut off the materials America needs to make its own products. He did not attack the output. He attacked the input. He did not target the finished vehicle. He targeted the atoms the vehicle is made of. And in doing so, he turned Trump's victory into the most catastrophic own goal in American industrial history. Receipt number 1, the materials dependency. Let me give you the numbers because the numbers are what make this crisis unsurvivable for the American auto industry. The United States automotive sector consumes approximately 5.5 million metric tons of aluminum annually. Canada supplies roughly 60% of all aluminum imports to the United States. Canadian smelters in Quebec, powered by some of the cheapest hydroelectric power on Earth, produce aluminum at costs and quality levels that no other supplier can match. You cannot stamp the body panel of a Ford F-150 without aluminum. You cannot cast the engine block of a Chevrolet Silverado without aluminum. You cannot build the structural frame of a Tesla Model Y without aluminum. The F-150 is the best-selling vehicle in the United States and has been for over 4 decades. Every single one of them requires Canadian aluminum. The specialized steel alloys are even more critical because they are even harder to replace. American automakers do not use generic steel. They use proprietary formulations developed jointly with Canadian mills. Specific chemical compositions, specific heat treatments, specific tensile strengths designed to meet crash safety standards, fuel efficiency requirements, and manufacturing tolerances. You cannot call a steel mill in Brazil or India and order these alloys. The specifications do not exist in their systems. The tooling does not exist in their plants. The certification process alone takes 18 to 24 months. And then the battery minerals. This is the category that turns a trade crisis into a strategic catastrophe. The United States is in the middle of a multi-hundred-billion-dollar transition to electric vehicles, the Inflation Reduction Act, the EV tax credits, the gigafactory construction boom. Every element of that transition depends on a reliable supply of lithium, cobalt, nickel, and graphite. Canada is the primary secure source of those minerals for North America. Canadian mines in Quebec, Ontario, and Saskatchewan produce refined lithium and processed nickel at world-class quality. Canadian deposits of cobalt and graphite are among the largest in the Western Hemisphere. The United States does not have the domestic mining capacity to feed its own battery factories. Full stop, the mines do not exist, the processing facilities do not exist, the permitting to build them would take 5 to 10 years, the capital investment would run into the tens of billions. Can the United States source these minerals elsewhere? Theoretically, from Australia, from Chile, from the Democratic Republic of Congo, from China, which controls over 70% of global lithium processing capacity, but sourcing from Australia or Chile adds months of shipping time and billions in logistics costs. Sourcing from the DRC introduces ethical and supply chain reliability concerns that make most corporations unwilling to commit. And sourcing from China means making the American EV industry dependent on America's primary strategic competitor, the exact dependency that the entire reshoring strategy was designed to eliminate. Carney understood this. He understood it because he spent his career understanding exactly these types of systemic dependencies. He understood that the American auto industry's reliance on Canadian materials is not a market preference. It is a geological fact. The minerals are where they are. The smelters are where they are. The supply chains were built where they were built because geography and physics demanded it. Trump looked at the supply chain and saw jobs that should be in America. Carney looked at the supply chain and saw a choke point that he controlled. Trump saw an industry he could dominate. Carney saw an ecosystem he could strangle, and the ecosystem is now strangling. Receipt number 2, the market panic. Within minutes of Carney's announcement, the financial markets delivered their verdict with the blunt honesty that only money can provide. Ford Motor Company stock dropped 14% in the first hour of trading after the embargo was announced. General Motors, already reeling from the cost of shutting its Canadian operations, fell another 11%. Stellantis dropped 13%. Tesla, the company most dependent on battery minerals for its entire business model, dropped 18%. The algorithms caught the news first. The high-frequency trading systems that monitor news feeds, process keywords, and execute trades in milliseconds read export embargo, aluminum, battery minerals, and indefinite. And they started dumping automotive stocks before human traders had finished reading the headlines. Then the humans caught up, and the humans panicked worse than the algorithms. Automotive executives in Detroit are scrambling in a state of absolute terror. They are looking at their inventory levels and running the clock. How many days of aluminum do we have in the warehouse? How many weeks of specialized steel? How many battery cells can we produce before the nickel runs out? The answer for most manufacturers is days to weeks, not months. The entire North American auto industry operates on just-in-time manufacturing, a system designed to minimize inventory costs by receiving materials exactly when they are needed, not before. Just-in-time is efficient when supply chains function. When supply chains are severed, just-in-time means you have almost nothing in reserve. Ford reportedly has 7 to 12 days of aluminum inventory at current production rates. GM has approximately 2 weeks of specialized steel. Tesla's battery mineral reserves are classified as proprietary, but industry analysts estimate 3 to 4 weeks at current production volumes before shortages force output reductions. Within a month, American auto production will be significantly curtailed. Within 2 months, it will be at crisis levels. Within 3 months, without resolution, the American auto industry will be producing at a fraction of its normal capacity. Not because of demand, not because of labor, not because of any problem that a tariff can fix, but because the physical materials needed to build vehicles no longer enter the country. Trump brought the assembly jobs home. But without Canadian materials, those assembly workers have nothing to assemble. Receipt number 3, the Pentagon alarm. Now let me show you the dimension of this crisis that the White House completely failed to anticipate, and that should terrify every American, regardless of political affiliation. The United States military relies on the exact same supply chains as the automotive industry, the same aluminum, the same specialized alloys, the same critical minerals, the same Canadian sources. The aluminum used to build the body of a Ford pickup truck is the same grade of aluminum used to build the airframe of an F-35 fighter jet. The specialized steel used for a Chevrolet chassis is the same family of alloys used for armored vehicle hulls. The lithium, cobalt, and nickel required for an electric vehicle battery are the exact same elements required for advanced missile guidance systems, encrypted military communications equipment, and satellite components. According to defense industry sources, the Pentagon held an emergency assessment within hours of Carney's embargo announcement. The assessment concluded that a prolonged Canadian materials embargo would degrade U.S. military manufacturing capability within 90 days. Fighter jet production at Lockheed Martin's facilities would face aluminum shortages. Armored vehicle production at General Dynamics would face steel alloy shortages. And the entire next-generation weapons program, every system that relies on advanced electronics containing rare earth elements and critical minerals, would face component shortages that could delay delivery by years. Pentagon officials reportedly prepared a memo for the president stating that the critical minerals embargo poses a direct and immediate threat to national security. The memo recommended immediate diplomatic resolution and warned that any escalation of the trade conflict would compound the damage to military readiness. The generals understood something that the trade advisors did not. When you sever a supply chain for economic reasons, you do not get to choose which customers are affected. The embargo does not distinguish between a car factory and a weapons factory. The lithium does not know whether it is going into a Tesla battery or a Tomahawk missile guidance system. When the supply stops, it stops for everyone. Trump pulled General Motors out of Canada to protect American manufacturing jobs. He provoked an embargo that now threatens American manufacturing across every sector, civilian and military. He traded long-term strategic security for a short-term political talking point. And the Pentagon is watching the consequences unfold with what one official described as absolute dread. Receipt number 4. The consumer catastrophe. Let me translate the geopolitics into the number that matters most to you. The number on the sticker at your local dealership. When the United States and Canada engage in total industrial war, they are placing a massive, immediate, inescapable tax on working-class citizens on both sides of the border. A tax that no one voted for, a tax that appears on no ballot, a tax that shows up not on April 15th, but every time you walk onto a dealer lot or open a used car listing. The deeply integrated North American auto industry means that a single vehicle component can cross the U.S.-Canada border up to 7 times before the finished car rolls off the assembly line. Raw aluminum goes north. Stamped panels come south. Subassemblies go north. Finished modules come south. Each crossing under the old system was seamless and tariff-free. With Trump's tariffs on one side and Canada's materials embargo on the other, that integrated system is dead. In the short term, assembly lines in the United States will halt production as materials run out. Fewer cars will be built. Fewer cars on dealer lots means higher prices. The laws of supply and demand are not optional. They are physics. Industry analysts estimate that new vehicle prices will increase by $3,000 to $7,000 within 60 days as inventory tightens. For trucks and SUVs, the highest margin, highest volume segment of the American market, the increase could exceed $10,000 per vehicle as aluminum-intensive models become scarce. The used car market will be obliterated simultaneously. When people cannot afford new cars, they buy used cars. Surge demand for used vehicles will push prices to levels not seen since the pandemic supply chain crisis, except this time, there is no vaccine for the underlying cause. A 5-year-old sedan that lists for $18,000 today could list for $26,000 in 3 months. And the ripple effects extend far beyond the dealership. The logistics companies that transport auto parts, the trucking firms, the rail lines will lose contracts overnight. Drivers will be furloughed. The local businesses that depend on factory workers, the diners across the street from the plants, the hardware stores, the gas stations, the daycare centers will lose their customers. Real estate values in factory towns will decline as unemployment rises. The American Midwest, the industrial heartland, the communities that Trump specifically promised to revitalize, faces a localized, severe recession caused directly by the trade policy that was supposed to save them. The workers Trump promised to protect are the workers who will be hurt first, hurt worst, and hurt longest. Now, let me give you the psychological profile comparison, because understanding why Trump walked into this trap and why Carney had the trap built before the tariffs were even announced is understanding the fundamental difference between these two leaders. Donald Trump views international trade as a zero-sum contest of dominance. For him to win, the other side has to visibly, painfully lose. He measures victory by the size of the concession extracted, the volume of the headline generated, the drama of the capitulation forced. He uses tariffs the way he uses everything else, as a blunt instrument of intimidation applied with overwhelming force under the assumption that the other side will eventually get scared and submit. This approach works against parties that have no alternatives. It works against small economies that cannot absorb the pain. It works against leaders who are psychologically susceptible to intimidation. It does not work against Mark Carney. Carney is a former central banker. He does not see trade as a contest of dominance. He sees it as an ecosystem of dependencies. He does not ask who is bigger. He asks who needs what. He does not measure leverage by GDP or military spending or consumer market size. He measures leverage by supply chain architecture, by the physical, geographical, geological reality of who produces what and who cannot survive without it. When Trump announced the tariffs, Carney did not react. He calculated. He ran the models. He identified the dependency, America's absolute reliance on Canadian aluminum, steel, and critical minerals, and he designed a response that converts that dependency into a weapon. Trump looked at the North American auto industry and saw assembly jobs he could move south. Carney looked at the same industry and saw raw materials he could stop at the border. Trump saw the surface, the factories, the workers, the finished cars. Carney saw the foundation, the atoms, the elements, the physical inputs without which the factories are empty buildings and the workers have nothing to build. Trump attacked the surface. Carney attacked the foundation. And without a foundation, the surface collapses. Every time. This is the pattern that has defined the entire US-Canada crisis. Trump escalates with force, assuming the target will submit. Carney responds with precision, targeting the specific dependency that makes Trump's escalation self-destructive. Trump brings a sledgehammer. Carney finds the load-bearing wall. The tariffs were the sledgehammer. The materials embargo is the load-bearing wall. And the auto industry is the building that is now collapsing because the man with the sledgehammer did not understand what was holding it up.